I was teaching a seminar actually just a few days ago and on Okinawa Nishinryu karate and application of pressure points, and we were going over a technique and I was showing a particular method of attacking a pressure point. It's a kind of specialty technique. It's where you sort of rake along the point, and you can't use it on every point, but on some points it's really, really effective, and it's a practice I've been doing for a long time, but I learned it from someone who was never my, officially sensei or Sifu or something like that. It was actually a man named Gin Foon Mark who taught it to me. In fact, Gin Foon Mark was the first person to teach me anything about pressure points, and I had no idea what he was talking about, even though I kind of thought I did. Back in the early 80s, I wrote an article about Gin Foon Mark for Inside Kung Fu magazine. It just so happened that his school of Southern Praying Mantis Kung Fu was located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is where I lived. I went to a school and I shot some film and a lot of photographs. And the thing that's interesting to me about that is that when you look at the total amount of time I spent in his school, interviewing him, observing, it was maybe 12 hours total. So he was never my Sifu. I was never part of his school. I was just a guy there. Trying to get information. But I remember he showed me two techniques for attacking pressure points. One was for attacking the pressure point called large intestine 10. And he had his students around and he was saying, if I remember the gist of the conversation, because he was talking and his students were talking at the same time, but the gist of it was, you punch, I do this, and your arm freeze. Okay, I remember his accent was really thick. Your arm freeze. And then I'm looking at his students like, what? And they say, yeah, you can't move your arm. Well, some years later, I was, 5, 6 years later, I met Sensei Dillman. Sensei Dillman showed me the same point. He attacked it differently. He hit it with a fist instead of a palm like Gin Foon Mark, but he said the same thing. He said, you hit this point, your arm cramps up and you can't use it. The other thing that Mark did was he taught me a particular technique for striking the point we call Heart 2. And it involved a kind of raking movement, and it was very particular how you formed your hand and how you attacked the point, and I remembered it, but I didn't understand it for years. But then it turns out that all these years later, I'm still applying that principle. Now, I need to be clear about this because it's not to me a technique. Yes, I use that method when I attack Heart 2, but I don't attack Heart 2 that often. That's not typically my go-to target. But I use that principle when attacking some points I do go to often. The same principle he taught me. I'm doing it with a different hand formation, but it's the same concept. And it came to me, I learned it from Gin Foon Mark, a guy who was never my Sifu. But as it turned out, he was one of my teachers. So I'm incredibly grateful to the 3 people I count as having been sensei to me across the years. Robert Fasaro, who I trained with in the 70s, Steve Young, who I trained with in the 80s, and George Dillman, who I've trained with for about the last 30 years. Each of these men has been sensei, my teacher. But I've had a lot of other teachers. And their influence is in my art as well. And Gin Foon Mark, he was one of those. And I'm incredibly grateful for that small and surprising opportunity that I had to learn something very important from him, which I continue to use to this day. I'm Chris Thomas, and these are some reflections from the master class. Thanks for watching. Now go train.